Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we're going to be talking about something a little outside of the normal purview of this podcast because I'm going to be answering a listener question about male sexual dysfunction. And the question was, what kind of tips and ideas do you have for men who are experiencing erectile dysfunction or inability to finish that seems to be due to performance anxiety related to natural family planning? So let's get into it. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. So, as I said in the intro, today we're going to be talking a little bit about men's sexual function. And, this is a podcast for women about sex and intimacy. So, what does this really have to do? Well, the sexual act involves both people. So when there is sexual dysfunction on one side, it affects both sides. But something else that I'm going to offer up are maybe some ideas or tips that you as the wife listening, if this is something that your husband struggles with, maybe ways that you can support him. So erectile dysfunction and inability to finish are very much categorized in the same place when it comes to men's sexual dysfunction. And what I find so unfortunate about sexual dysfunction in general, it is very clinicalized, as in everything that is recommended. If your husband went to a doctor, the first thing that would be recommended would be drugs or some other kind of intervention in that way. And what we're talking about is a difficulty of a more psychological nature. And so, I'm not going to be talking in this episode about the different drugs that are available and the different procedures that are available. I'm really just going to be talking about some different ideas. And I also just want to caveat that I have put a lot of my research into the women's side of things. So this is really just some ideas and some tips and tricks, maybe just from a different perspective, a non-doctor perspective, and a very Catholic perspective. So one of the things in this question is, what do we do with this performance anxiety that's related to NFP? And this listener had kind of clarified it as, there's kind of this feeling of only having a few available days. And so needing to utilize that. And I see this a lot on both sides. I actually hear this a lot from women as well, of this just kind of fear of, oh my gosh, we have to use this day and beating ourselves up if we don't use the day or if we're not able to get aroused. And we put all of this pressure on ourselves. All of that pressure is mental. All of that pressure is coming from our thoughts. We need to just shift the thoughts because our brain is so powerful as human beings. Our brain is ridiculously powerful. And the things that we think and the things that we tell ourselves in our brain, they create our results. And so when we put a ton of pressure on ourselves to perform within a certain amount of time, it really ends up being really, really hard to perform in that amount of time. This is something that I talk about in my orgasm course for Catholic women is we've got to take the pressure off. This happens with women a ton is we're trying to get aroused. It's taking a long time. Then we start telling ourselves, oh my gosh, this is taking so long. I've got to hurry up. And we are putting the brakes on when we start telling ourselves that. And so what ultimately I think needs to kind of come to fruition within the relationship together is taking the pressure off. If your husband, or if you're the man listening right now, if you experience some kind of sexual dysfunction due to this fear, and performance anxiety and necessity to perform within this short amount of time, we've got to take the pressure off. So that might mean, having some conversations about it, talking about sex and just recognizing that this is a gift. This is not a need. It doesn't need to happen right now. This is a way for you as spouses to unite together and celebrate your love and celebrate your marriage and your union, and that this is a very good thing, and that it's not a need. It's not a checkbox that needs to be fulfilled, and it doesn't have to happen tonight. Now, another thing that I want to just put out there is women, we have a lot of control over the sexual relationship. I think this is something that we haven't talked about all that much on the podcast, kind of alluded to it a little bit, but we hold like the control over sex. We're ultimately like that person who's saying yes or no, because sex involves like someone else's body coming into our body. And something that we can ask ourselves as women in any situation, but especially if our husband is experiencing this kind of performance anxiety, is like, are we controlling sex so much that it is only happening very rarely? And do we need to be doing that? And that is something maybe to, again, bring to conversation together, but also just kind of think about, like, if my husband is experiencing performance anxiety and we're only having sex like once a month, well, maybe we need to increase the amount of times that we're initiating sex and recognize that, this is a very good, holy thing. And it's something that we can do more often. Practice makes perfect here. And just, increasing the amount of sex can really take the pressure off of like needing to perform in that moment. And I know that brings up a lot of things. It's like, oh my gosh, but what about this? And I don't owe my husband sex. And no, of course you don't. But like, sex is a really good thing. And it's something that we should enjoy doing and should be fun and pleasurable. If sex isn't those things, then there's some more conversation pieces. It's time to, learn some foreplay techniques, learn some new positions maybe. You can check out the positions guide that I have. I'll link that in the show notes. The positions guide is awesome. It's PDF. You can just download it. And there's tons of positions on there, but there's also a whole foreplay guide and lots of great stuff in there. So if sex isn't something that is enjoyable and pleasurable, like, let's change that. But really, can we have sex more often? Can we increase the amount of sex that we're having in order to help our husband who is experiencing these performance anxiety issues, erectile dysfunction, or inability to finish because of this performance anxiety? Another thing to look at is just take a look at your intentions. And is it really necessary for you right now to be, using natural family planning to like its fullest extent, its highest efficacy? That's what I meant. Or can we loosen up a little bit and just recognize, okay, yeah, well, ideally we want to avoid pregnancy, but maybe it'd be okay if we use some more possibly fertile days if a baby comes. Take a look at that. Have that conversation together. Bring that to discernment. Because sex is so good for a marriage. It's so important for a marriage. No, it's not a requirement for a marriage, but it's a really good, beautiful thing. And if there's so much pressure around having sex, then that's really unfortunate, especially if it's like not allowing the two of you to really come together and complete the act. And then the last thing that I kind of want to talk about, just to close out this musings on this thought. Again, I'm not an expert in this area. These are just some musings from a woman who talks about sex and intimacy to other Catholic women. But there can be a lot of shame tied up in inability to finish for your husband. And any amount that you can alleviate that shame is going to really help. Because sex is tied up in our personhood. It's so intimate. And so when we're not able to have sex, and I see this on the other side with women all the time, when we're not able to get aroused, when sex is painful or penetration is impossible, like we have identity issues at that point. This is the same thing, just on the male side. It's questioning his own identity. It is very, very difficult. And so any amount that you can alleviate shame around this feeling of not being able to complete the act is going to be very helpful. And that's not just, oh, honey, it's okay, but continuing after the fact to be interested in and willing to have sex and try again, I think is probably one of the biggest things that you can do to help. So, on Monday night, if you guys try to have sex and it just doesn't really work out, then if you can, initiate on Tuesday night and be excited about it and be interested and encourage your husband to try again. Because again, practice makes perfect. But really just, it's not about just, oh, honey, it's okay. It's really okay. We'll get through this, whatever. That's not going to help all that much. But I think continuing to show your husband that you have interest in sex, if it's not happening for him, then that's going to help him have more confidence in trying again and having sex again. And when it comes to the morality of this issue, like there's no culpable sin here, because the idea is that like you're trying to come together to have sex, and through no like intentional fault of anyone, the act is not able to be completed. So there's no moral culpability of like, oh my gosh, we're sinning because I had an orgasm and my husband wasn't able to finish. No, there's none of that. So also we need to take that pressure and that shame off of this situation. But also at the same time, in like just all around, we need to reframe confession. And confession is an opportunity for God to pour his grace into our lives. So it's totally okay, even if there's no moral culpability to this situation, to bring this to confession and ask God for help. Your husband can bring it. You can bring it. Bring this issue to prayer. Do a holy hour. Make it your intention for Mass. Like these are places that God can pour his grace into, and he can help you guys through this. So there you go. There's my musings on male sexual dysfunction as it has to do with kind of NFP and that performance anxiety.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.